There are many stories in the Old Testament, but the first story is the story of creation. God created the Garden of Eden. He also created Adam and Eve and placed them in the garden. In this paradise, there was only one thing that they were not supposed to do. They were not supposed to eat off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but they did anyway, and that is known as the fall, or the original sin. God said, fine, if you want to know good and evil, but do good. Unfortunately, the people did evil all the time. The whole world became so evil that God wiped out everyone through Noah's flood. But once this flood subsided, God told Noah's descendants to repopulate the earth. Instead, they built the Tower of Babel. This didn't make God happy, so he confounded their languages and scattered them all over the whole world. Next, God tried something different. He picked one man, a godly man, and made him all kinds of promises, that he would have as many offspring as there were stars in the sky, that he would be the father of many kings, he would have his own promised land, and the whole world would be blessed through him. That man's name was Abraham. But Abraham was 100 years old, and his wife Sarah was 90 when they finally had their first son, a boy named Isaac. Isaac had twin boys. The older son was named Esau, and the younger son was named Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons by 4 different women. Obviously, Jacob was a little bit sneaky, but one night, while wrestling with God, God changed his name to Israel. And when God changed Jacob's name to Israel, his 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's favorite son was a young man named Joseph. Joseph's brothers were jealous of him. They beat him up and threw him into a pit. They were going to kill him, but they sold him to the Egyptians instead. Joseph ended up as the second most powerful man in Egypt, and when a famine occurred, his brothers came to Egypt, and he provided for them and for their families. At first, the Hebrews were welcome, but later the Egyptians turned them into slaves. Things got so bad for the Israelites that they pleaded to God for a deliverer, so God sent them Moses. Moses had to battle with the Pharaoh, but eventually Moses won, and he took the people back home to their promised land. This trip that the Hebrews took from Egypt back to Israel is known as the Exodus. Along the way, they stopped at Mount Sinai, where God gave Moses the law, or the 10 Commandments. But now the children of Israel knew what God required of them, and unfortunately for them, they fell short, time and time again. Part of God's punishment was for them to wander in the desert for 40 years. During those 40 years, that whole generation of Israelites died off, including Moses. So another man, a great general, led the children of Israel in Moses' place, and that man's name was Joshua. Joshua led the people back to the promised land, where they fought and won many battles and many wars against the heathen. All these victories were known as the conquest. During this time, the nation of Israel wasn't ruled by presidents or prime ministers or kings. They were ruled instead by judges. And the very last judge was a very important man whose name was Samuel. And this last judge anointed the first king, a king named Saul. But God wasn't pleased with King Saul, so God took away King Saul's throne and gave it to another man, a man after God's own heart. This second king may have been Israel's greatest king, King David. After David's rule, he placed his own son upon the throne, a very rich and a very wise king, King Solomon. During his reign, Solomon built the most important building in all the history of Israel. He built the temple. After the third king should have come the fourth king, but instead the nation had a civil war, and the country split in two. In the north was the northern kingdom, or the 10 tribes, or the nation of Israel. In the south was the southern kingdom, or the nation of Judah. Both kingdoms were warned not to sin, but Israel continually disobeyed and was destroyed by God using Assyria. The southern kingdom, the nation of Judah, also worshipped idols, and they were conquered by Babylon. After this defeat, many Jews were taken away captive to Babylon for a period of 70 years, and this exile is known as the Babylonian captivity. The last story of the Old Testament is the return. At the end of that 70 years, the Jews returned to Jerusalem, and here ends the Old Testament.